InFi, episode 23.
Welcome to InFi, the future of finance, hosted by American economist and author Dr. Robert Murphy. Each week, tune in for dynamic discussions with business pioneers about emerging trends in finance, life insurance, asset management, technology, and more. Now, let's talk the future of finance.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the InFi podcast. Today, we have the most amazing guest of all time, the CEO of Infineo, Cole Snell. Let me read to you from his official bio, and then I'll give a little bit more of the inside baseball. Cole Snell is the founder and CEO of Infineo, a forward-thinking technology company dedicated to digitizing the $3 trillion plus life insurance industry through the strategic use of blockchain and AI technologies. Cole is an author and serial entrepreneur with a diverse background spanning multiple industries, from food to fintech. His most recent exit was in 2012, where he sold Provincial Fine Foods to Saputo International. So Cole is a very interesting guy, character you might even say, and I thought it would be fun to have him on the podcast. I deliberately tried not to talk shop, okay? I wanted to give those of you who are familiar with our company some more of the man behind the man, and to just see his origin story, as it were. All right, so that's what we focus on in this episode. I think you're going to enjoy it. Certainly, if you're interested in business, if you're an entrepreneur or want to be an entrepreneur, I think you can learn a lot from Cole's stories, and that's what I'm trying to get across here. So without further ado, here's my conversation with the founder and CEO of Infineo, Cole Snell. Cole, welcome to the InFi podcast.
Dr. Murphy, it's a pleasure to be here.
So for those who have been with us for the whole stretch, they may remember that before we rebranded the podcast, you were a co-host, and now you're back as a guest.
Yeah, you fired me.
It just, things didn't work out. It's just, I let you go. I think that's the way.
You let me go. Yeah. You were thinking that I had potential for other opportunities.
Exactly. I didn't want to hold you back from doing.
You can't, I don't know, can you even say you can fire people in this day and age anymore? Can you even fire people anymore in this day and age?
Yeah, you don't hear that term too much. So
no, it's like not inclusive.
You gotta be very careful.
I guess firing someone would be the most uninclusive thing you could do.
It would, yes, definitely. So I think you've got a very interesting background, and I think we probably, in one of the earlier episodes of what was then called the Founders Forum, we did a quick sort of bio swap. But here, let's go in with more detail into your origin story. So where should we begin? Did you grow up in Canada?
I grew up in Canada. Yeah. I grew up in Toronto, Canada. Yeah.
And at the time, when you were, did it occur to you at some point that, wow, the political scene here in Canada is kind of crazy, or is that something that only happened, once you were an adult?
That happened. So I grew up in my adolescence and in even my early years as an adult. I'm 50. It really, Canada was a great place to live. I mean, Canada kind of had a great reputation. It had the reputation of, a place of opportunity. There was safety. It was generally, I think, and I can experience, I think it was Canada was generally a good, it was kind of like it felt like, you were living in like a Northern European country or something like that. Well, today is a different story.
Right.
I mean, I'm no longer a tax resident of Canada. I'm technically still a Canadian citizen. I'll always carry that around with me, but I spend as little time in Canada today as I possibly can. It's a terrible place.
Now, your views in that respect, is that something you got from your parents, or, are they cool with Justin Trudeau and you're the oddball in the family?
Yeah, I'm kind of the oddball in the family. I mean, my parents, it's actually an interesting, so I actually had to bring them into the daylight of Justin Trudeau. I mean, they kind of, listen to this, like in Canada, there's this thing called the CBC, which is the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, which is essentially owned by Justin Trudeau. And he manages to manipulate and disseminate disinformation through this kind of unilateral media channel that is like Canada's only national media channel. I mean, it's kind of draconian and communist kind of sounding And so like my parents grew up in like the 60s and the 70s listening to the CBC and it had at the time great content. So they listened to the CBC all day. It's just on in the background at their home. And it's just that they haven't really been able to iterate of what the good messaging of the CBC versus Justin Trudeau's messaging of the CBC. So they're brainwashed, and I had to go in and have an intervention with them a couple of years ago. And I had to say, no. Like this man is actually, very evil. Oh, how really? He's the Prime Minister of Canada. How evil can he be? Well, I sat them down and showed them some, YouTube videos, and I just kind of went right for the jugular. I just went to, the whole thing where Trudeau says, it's okay for, children to go through sex changes. And, that kind of just stopped them in their tracks. That was enough. I just went right for the jugular. I didn't talk about, the price of living in Canada or inflation or the unlikelihood that, someone in their 30s today could buy a home in Canada. I just went straight for, Justin Trudeau thinks it's okay for 7-year-olds to not tell their parents about wanting to have a sex change. And they were like, well, that can't be. And I said, well, here's the data. Let's go read about it. And they read about it and now they don't like it.
Yeah, I've noticed that too, talking with some of my friends and their parents, that above a certain age, so you and I are roughly the same, but it's not even a matter, what I'm trying to say, if you try to tell people of the older generation, like in the US, we call them baby boomers, like that demographic, about, trans issues, it's not that they're taking the other side, it's that they just don't believe you. They're like, no, what are you talking about? It can't be like what you're talking about. That doesn't make any sense,
Yeah.
Like they think you're pulling their leg or something.
That's not even fathomable to them.
Yeah.
Like,
So in a sense, that's good. It's charming. It's sweet. Like, you're right. Yeah. But back, 10 to 20 years ago, this would have been, a joke script in a movie or something. It actually was. That was a, thing. Various, satires and so forth. Okay. Tell us about, I know you were a master of the cheese business. How does that happen?
Right. So I was regarded, I've won an award called I actually think it's French for something horse or something, but like a chevalier. I don't know. I think that is a French word for horse. I'm not exactly sure, but that's like the highest award you can get in cheese. And this guy from France came over and awarded me. This was some number of almost over a decade and a half ago now in a former life. But yeah, I was an actual expert in cheese. So how does that happen? This is an interesting story. So here's how you become an expert in cheese. You get a career as a naturopath. So that was my original career profession was in naturopathic medicine. Patients would come in to see me and they would say, I'd like to get healthier. And I would say, okay, well, let's start with the basics, diet and exercise. Fair enough. So I'd prescribe diet and exercise. They'd go, okay, well, tell me about exercise. I would say, well, get a good pair of shoes, go for a walk. All right. They could afford it. They could conceptualize it and they could go and execute on it and they felt great about themselves. So exercise, check. Diet, total conundrum. Can't find good food, can't afford good food, don't like the taste of it, I'm allergic to it, it smells weird, etc. It's very expensive, right? Good food is very, very expensive. So diet was a real challenge. So then I went out to kind of solve this challenge. I've solved exercise and now I needed to solve diet. I discovered artisanal cheese. I discovered that artisanal cheese is very interesting. The story behind all these cheesemakers and where it came from is very, very interesting. It's tied to history. It's tied to the geography. At the time, the Food Network was getting very popular and food was becoming very trendy. To say you were a foodie was very, very cool. To be able to show up at work at the water cooler and talk about food or wine pairing was very, very cool. Like you were kind of in if you could do this. So I kind of timed that well. But I also discovered that for people that were lactose intolerant, what a lot of physicians and naturopaths were prescribing for lactose was like lactobacteria, things like acidophilus and bifidus. And well, where is acidophilus and bifidus found? Well, it's found in dairy products. So it was odd to me that the way to treat an allergy to dairy was to give you dairy. But the reality is you're giving yourself a different form of dairy. You're giving yourself good dairy versus bad dairy. So non-homogenized dairy that's in small batches on more of an artisanal level has a lot of these bacteria. So I have a lactose intolerance. The best things for lactose intolerance is yogurt. Well, last I looked, Yogurt's made of milk. So what's the difference between good milk and bad milk? And so I kind of thought, well, could you eat good cheese? If cheese is made of milk, could you go and eat good cheese? So what I would say to my patients when they would come in is get a good pair of shoes, go for a walk, and go and visit this. And I was working in Thunder Bay, Ontario at the time. This is where this small little town in northern Canada, in Thunder Bay, Ontario. So I would say to my patients, get a good pair of shoes and go for a walk, provided it wasn't minus 40 outside, because it often was in this community. And then go and visit the Thunder Oak Cheese Farm, is what I would say, which was this local cheese farm that made small batch, world famous Gouda, not Gouda, Gouda cheese. And they would do that. And they would come back and they would say, hey, I ate this cheese. It was nutritious, delicious. It was easy to prepare. I met Walter and Margaret, the cheesemakers. I look cool. And from there, I went, where's the cheese? And I went and discovered this lack of, to kind of cut to the enterprising of this. I discovered that at a local Whole Foods market, they had a really robust cheese counter. And I walked in and I spoke to a lady named Julia Rogers at the time. And I said, Julia, tell me about your cheese inventory and where it comes. Because now I knew I had this relationship with this Thunder Oak cheese company. And she said to me, well, we're really struggling here. And this was a new store in Toronto, Canada. I had moved from Thunder Bay. Now I was living in Toronto, Canada. And there was Julia said to me, who managed the cheese counter at Whole Foods, she said, there's a real gap in trying to get good quality cheese, because all the good quality cheese in Canada is in Quebec. And we're here in Toronto and we really can't get it. And so we're stuck to selling, mediocre kind of quality cheese. And I said, have you ever heard of Thunder Oak Gouda? This from way up in Thunder Bay. And she goes, yeah, that's one of the world's most famous cheeses outside of Holland. We would love to get some. So I called up Walter and Margaret, and I brought some cheese down from Thunder Bay, where I used to send my patients. And then I got in my car after I delivered some cheese to Whole Foods and sold it to them. And I drove my car to Montreal for about 4 hours down the highway to Quebec. And at the time I had a Honda Accord. And this is 15 years ago. And I filled my car up full of cheese that I just bought out of La Fromagerie du Marché Atwater and Marché Jean Talon in Montreal, Quebec. I filled my car full of cheese that I just bought off of counters, all from Quebec. And I drove it back to Julia at Whole Foods. And I showed up in the loading dock with my Honda Civic with these coolers and ice packs full of cheese. And I said, here you go. Would you like to, buy my cheese? And Julia almost fell over. She couldn't believe that I had Riopel and I had Tom de Grossil and I had Les Quatorze Arpents, these super famous. There's 300 artisanal cheesemakers in Quebec. There's, one in Ontario, Canada, so I saw this massive disconnect. Long story short, Bob, I built the world's largest artisanal cheese distribution and vertically integrated retail food service business over the course of the next 7 or 8 years, and then ended up exiting and selling it. So that's how you get into cheese.
What's interesting in your story is, as an economist, so when the lady who runs the cheese counter at Whole Foods said, we can't get our hands on that cheese over in Quebec, and you said, have you thought about using a car?
Yeah. But I mean, this is right. So, but as an economist, I mean, if you think about all great startups, and it's like the solution to the problem is just really about execution, and it's just about there's just so obvious. Well, why don't you just drive there? Well, Julia had a job at Whole Foods. She wasn't incentivized. It would take an entrepreneur. It would take a person to think, well, yeah, you could just drive down the road and go. I just bought it at retail. Right. I just walked in, maxed out my credit cards. I bought thousands of dollars worth of cheese just off the counter. I didn't even ask for a wholesale deal. I got pieces and wedges. I just went in and took a shopping cart and cleaned out, because I looked at the prices that they were selling it for in Montreal versus at retail versus what they would buy it for at wholesale. And there was literally about 100% margin, gross margin, between what I could buy it for at retail in Montreal versus what I could sell it for at wholesale in Ontario, 4 hours down the road.
Yeah. I mean, I understand why it would take someone, with a certain degree of intrepidity to try that, because I would be, I can just think that if it were me, I would be worried if I go do that and show up, they're going to say, no, there's health code violation. I can't buy cheese from some guy out of his car. What are you talking about? You know what I mean? They'd shut me down. I can't do that. And then I'd be stuck with thousands of dollars of cheese and be like, well, I guess I know what I'm eating this weekend. But
so the demand was so high. So yes, I was definitely violating every supply chain compliance, temperature, health, botulism, listeria, E. coli worry that existed.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, again, thinking about the economics of it, the demand was so high that even a corporation, and at the time, Whole Foods was still was a multinational even 15 years ago. It was a very big organization. I mean, this is probably like 12 years ago now, really. They still turned a blind eye and they bought cheese from me out of my Honda Accord for probably 3 or 4 months. I made in that fashion probably 5 or 6 deliveries because then they bought all my stuff. So I got back in my car, I drove back to Montreal and cleaned. Then eventually I bought a truck with a reefer, and then I hired a refrigeration company, then I had controlled temperature sensitive supply chain protocols put into place. Yeah, but they were willing to buy the cheese from me in that fashion.
Okay, and then I've heard you tell this story before. Can you explain, your distribution opened up and then your idea of like it wasn't the cheese, eventually it was like the story you told?
Right. So one of the things, we built this huge organization. We were in 3 different countries selling cheese. A lot of it was imported from Europe at this point in time, distributed kind of from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, around North America. We even sold cheese into Mexico and a couple of Caribbean countries, kind of in one-off kind of situations. So I had this large sales team. And the message that I gave to the sales team was always be really passionate about the food, because we branched out into not just cheese, we branched into other deli type products, charcuterie and dry cured meats and various condiments and things like that. Well, I mean, we were selling to Walmart, we were selling to Costco, we were selling to Kroger, large, big banner grocers. We had a big food service division. So we had a big sales team. And I would say to the sales team all the time, be passionate about the food that you sell for one reason. And they would say, well, why is that? Why are we passionate about selling food? And I would say, because what happens if you don't eat? And they would say, right, we die. You need food to live. And it kind of got back to how I got into this as a naturopath, where, if you spent more on your food, because food is a commodity, generally speaking, you would get more. You would get a better culinary experience. It would be more delicious. And generally speaking, if it was made in small batches and it was artisanal, it would be more healthy for you as well. So we would always say, be passionate about the food that you sell and you educate. We sold through education. We would educate everyone on where the food came from, how it could affect you from a health perspective, how to pair it with wine. These are kind of the 3 components to it. Be passionate about what you sell, because if you don't buy the thing that we're selling, you're going to die. Basically, if you don't eat, you're going to die was the message. So eat well was kind of our message. And our sales team were fired up about that, right? We didn't say that directly, but we kind of got around it by saying, put good things into your body and don't be afraid to pay for it, because the better it is, the more expensive it's going to be, right? Kind of food's a commodity. So there's the big kind of the economics again. Now, the problem though, is that, and I thought to myself, I found the holy grail of businesses. I will never sell anything else because I'm always about value. I always want to sell the most valuable thing. And I always felt like food was the most valuable thing, because if you don't eat, you die. Right. It was an easy thing to add value to, because a lot of the stories behind the food were misunderstood. So we did a very good job with that. And then I woke up one day, especially after one of my sales reps came back to me and says, Cole, the prices of food are really going up. People can't afford it. I went home and I slept on that. I woke up the next day and I realized that I was a fraud. I wasn't selling the most valuable thing. I realized the most valuable thing is money, because people can't afford to buy the food that I was selling. People they weren't misunderstanding food. They just were misunderstanding money. I was misunderstanding value. I recognized that if I wanted people to be able to afford the foods that I'd sell, I didn't need to educate them on spending more money on food. I needed to educate them on money, on having the money, acquiring the money to be able to afford the food that I was selling. So I packaged the whole thing up. The timing was right, and I sold it. And I went in to the money business. I spent a year trying to find the most valuable thing in money, the most valuable form of money, the most valuable story in money, so that I could take my skill set about education, motivation, training, and value add so that people could afford to buy the food from the company that I sold to a multinational.
Right. So, and I know we're getting in the financial sector, so, but if we pause, because there was, you told me that with the story too, like you would come up with like the little place cards.
Right. Eventually, so say like Parmigiano Reggiano, for example, we were selling wheels of Parmigiano, and these are like these 40 kilogram, like 80 pound, 100 pound wheels of cheese, these wheels of Parmigiano Reggiano. We bring them in from Parma, Italy, and we would sell them for about 80 cents a pound more than our competition. Whole Foods, Walmart, and Costco would buy them from me at 80 cents more, not because we had faster service or better product, but only because every time my cheese arrived in their loading dock, they got a little card just like this, a business card. I don't even know who this company is. I don't think I'm promoting them. And on the back of the business card, on the front of the business card, was the name of the cheese, a description of the cheese, how to pair it with wine, and the name of the cheese maker and their website. Mm-hmm. And what people would do is the stores like Whole Foods recognized they weren't even buying cheese from me. They were buying these little business cards because I trained their customer on coming in and picking up a piece of our cheese and then picking up the business card or the description of the cheese. And what people would do is they would take them home, and then eventually we provided these little like clips, and they would put out their cheese board and they'd have the little tasting notes right beside the cheese. People weren't buying cheese from us. They were buying stories, and they were buying an ability to deliver the story. The value was in the card. So we could afford to charge 80 cents more for this commodity cheese, that's just relatively speaking quite a lot for food, which is highly competitive, just because we had these business cards. And God forbid we sold cheese to Whole Foods or Walmart and the deli manager received the order at the loading dock and we didn't have these cards. Mm-hmm. I never received a phone call saying, hey, I got some rotten cheese, or these things happen. It's temperature sensitive stuff. Mm-hmm. It was always like, where's my darn cards?
So the card wasn't for the employee at Whole Foods. The card was for the ultimate customer, because they'd have a dinner party. They'd put it out on the board. They'd have the little cards, and people would be like, oh, yes, a precocious cheese paired with a red wine.
Right.
Okay.
Right. That's what they would want. They would want, and the deli manager would be beside themselves because people would just come to that store because they knew they could get these little cards. And customers wanted the cards because customers wanted to go home and look cool. This is the thing about sales. This is the thing about value. If you can make people look cool, if you can make people look smart, you're going to get their business. And that's what we would do. People would now have a cheese board. They would invite friends and family over, and they would put out these little, and they would be talking about it and tasting it. And oh, wow, this cheese came from this little island in Quebec, and $1 for every kilo sold goes to a youth art development organization. This cheese is called Riopel. There's 300 people that live on this island. They all work to the contribution of making this cheese. Well, Riopel, why Riopel? Well, Riopel is actually Jean-Paul Riopel is a world famous artist who lived and worked on this island. You can go to the National Museum in Ottawa, Canada, and see a whole wing devoted to his art. And these stories were just endless. They just go on and on and on. And I always say that behind every good cheese, there's a better story. Now, the question was, well, then how do you relate that to other businesses? Do all things that we're selling have good stories? Well, I would suggest that if the thing that you're selling doesn't have a good story, is it really worth selling?
Well, and I think I've talked to you about this before, Cole, too, that, I went over to the ARC event that Jordan Peterson and his pals put on, sort of like the Free Society response to the WEF. And that was one of the themes of the conference, was to say, we have the data on our side, clearly free market economies work better than socialists. Well, there's no doubt there. But we need a better story, because the left is captivating young people with the stories that they're going to be social justice warriors. They're going to, stand up to oppression and liberate underprivileged people from their shackles and da-da-da. And if we're just, but GDP will go 3.2% more under our framework, like nobody cares about that. That's not, so anyway, people, I think, around, and even too, like with the advertising, you're saying like Nike did such a great job with Air Jordans and whatever, that it's, it's not that they have statistical tests showing that you can jump a little bit higher if you wear, our sneaker versus someone. It's just, I want to look cool, and Michael Jordan's, on TV doing this, and I want to be cool too. So
it's almost like you're talking about the unstory. It's like, how do you undo a story? Like, because the left is coming up with these stories and these narratives, but it's like, you got to have, what's the anti-story almost in a way, which is like, actually, really, I've never really thought about it in this way. Like, so the next story, as an example, like the next story I feel that the left is going to be talking about is universal basic income, right? So that's going to be a story. And there's going to be, well, look how great the world is going to be. We're going to give you this free money. You're going to just get thousands of dollars a month for nothing because our government is great and we love you.
Yep.
Well, what's the unstory? What's the anti-story to that? What's the real, like, how do you tell a story about to people where, no, that's a really bad idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm working on it. It really is amazing how much that, like, coupled with, modern monetary theory or MMT, how much that has taken hold. And I, like, on Twitter, I just see people sharing, this the other day, this lady shared a thing, and she's like a state level, I think she used to be a senator, like at the state level in the United States. And it was, many empirical studies show that targeted UBI programs, it was like, if you give randomly selected people $1,000 a month and you check in with them 6 months later, they report an increase in life satisfaction. He was like, you don't say. I bet if you gave someone $1,000, they would have $1,000 more dollars. And so therefore, if the government just gave thousands of dollars to everybody, we'd all be millionaires, and it's, so I'm trying to, and then they say, yeah, well, we can just print money. What's your point, Bob? Yeah, we thought it through. We know how to do it. You print money. So it is amazing that where we are at this point. Okay, let me ask you, Cole. So you had mentioned the naturopath stuff. I think people who are watching the video can see that you could probably lift heavy items. So were you always, a strapping young lad, or like, was there, when you were 20, were you like a jacked guy, or did that come later?
Yeah, but the weights, the weightlifting came later for sure. I've always been blessed genetically. My parents, my grandparents, I'm 50. I have a grandmother who still lives at home. She's 96. She still drives. She's thriving. She's got more energy than I do. So I'm very, very blessed. And genetically, I just have been. I take that as a huge responsibility. I don't take it for granted. And I feel as though, because I've been blessed, I feel that the responsibility I have to it is especially as I've gotten older. When I was younger, I was really into like a lot of more cardiovascular endurance type exercises. But I've recognized as I get older, it's important to keep muscle on my body. And because a lot of muscle, it's harder to keep muscle on your body as you age. And I turned 50 last summer. So I recognized when I was around 45 that I needed to start lifting heavy weights. And I needed to lift heavy weights to kind of work against this thing called gravity, and say, I look at certain people in my life who are older than me who haven't lifted heavy weights versus people that have lifted heavy weights. And you could see they have better posture. They see like into their 70s and 80s, they have a better style of life because of the heavy weights. So yeah, I got into heavy weightlifting at about 45. And then, so outside of the, say, physiological benefits, then I also noticed a massive emotional benefit to lifting heavy weights. And then I had a very spiritual connection to lifting heavy weights as well. And I kind of, in business, we talk, oh, it's a big lift, or it's a heavy lift. We use these like sayings at the financial industry. Oh, what's the lift on that? Right. And I think, well, if I'm, a founder and a CEO and I have this responsibility and I'm running a company and I have payroll and, accounts payable, and if that's a lift, why don't I just go to the gym and just lift stuff? And if I can lift it there, then I could probably lift it here. It just seems pretty straightforward, right?
And it's so, yeah, we can just investigate this a little bit, because I think there is a lot there. So is one thing that, okay, here's what I'm trying to get at. I think there's a correlation. So for sure, this is well documented in the literature that taller men on average make more money, and they can even come up with like, a regression analysis. And for every inch you are above 6 foot, you make blah, 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 more on average, that kind of thing. And so that, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts, on that element and what's driving what there. But I think it wouldn't surprise me at all if it's true that, on average, guys who are in really good shape in business make more money or, have higher positions within a given company. And so I'm wondering what the interaction is there. Is it like, so one real basic explanation would be, oh yeah, like just somebody who has the discipline to go to the gym and whatever also has the discipline to work longer hours and to go do more research and da. And so that's why the two go hand in hand. A more cynical explanation is just, yeah, guys are real shallow or whatever. And if they, that's why like former NFL stars are good, stockbrokers and stuff because guys just want to talk to them and they buy stuff. So, if someone comes into a board meeting and he's 6'5" and jacked, he's just going to have a more commanding presence. And so if you add that he's not stupid on top of that, that's a pretty, lethal combination. So anyway, what are your thoughts on that?
100%. I 100% agree with that. I think that as, in business, if you have investors investing money into your company, you need to show up in the absolute best version of yourself. You need to take every advantage that you have that you can give yourself to win in business. Being fit, coming into a boardroom, having a presence, but then backing it up as well and being smart, being prepared, right? Because it's a slippery slope. Whereas if you clearly, it'd be like to someone to say, or to look at a really fit person in a boardroom, like, well, you clearly spend a lot of time exercising, but you're also spending a lot of time in your business, right? Because if you look great and you look fit, but your business sucks, you don't have good morale, you're an okay leader, but you look really good. Well, it's a really kind of a diminishing return. Like it's not really serving you. So you got to have both, right? I believe you got to look good because then if you look good, you likely probably feel good and you're going to make other people around you feel, but you still have to execute. You still have to like crush it in the boardroom. You still have to, be able to, execute and, lead a team and hit your KPIs. So you got to have both. And so my version of that was also cutting out alcohol as well. I haven't had a drink in over 10 years. And I really relate to Donald Trump on that as well. I mean, he talks often about that being one of his competitive advantages, in business. And I'm very, very proud of that. I let investors and my team know all the time that you will never catch me wasting time in a bar. I may waste time in a gym. But I will not waste time or investors' money on wine, alcohol, or I will not waste time in a bar. So that's my offset, for that. And I don't go to the gym like for that long. Like when I was younger, in my early 40s, I would go to the gym for an hour and a half at a time because I knew I needed to get that base. But now that I have that base, I always heard these things about muscle memory. It's really true. I could literally go to the gym. Like last night I went for 15 minutes. And my thinking on the gym is I can go in and hit a body part and I can get it broken. If I can break that body part, right? If I can go in there and fail, and I use this analogy all the time, is that I'm going to go to the gym and fail. It's a much safer place to fail there than in business, right? So I'm going to go fail in the gym. I'm going to go to failure. So I can get like last night I did chest and I did 15 minutes. I was focused for that 15 minutes, but I wasn't on my phone. I was unplugged and I was totally reset. Physiologically, emotionally, and spiritually completely reset. Like I crushed myself and my chest for 15 minutes. So the example is, well, did I go to the gym long enough yesterday? Well, I feel it in my chest. I feel it. I feel sore kind of in my chest today. So that was good. That was all I needed to do. 15 minutes.
Okay, great. So and this kind of dovetails. I also wanted to ask you about your philosophy for leadership styles. So how, for example, one element is it seems to me like people are in an organization or, you watch TV and Captain Kirk's leading the Enterprise or whatever. And the people want to feel like the guy in charge, just assume it's a guy, knows what he's doing and is confident. And so like if you say, hey, what are we doing? You want to say, oh, well, I was thinking we might, what do you guys think? I was thinking we would do this. And, that doesn't seem like a bad idea, right? Like that would be terrifying, especially if you're in a dangerous situation, if it's a bad economy or, if you're leading troops around the bend or something, you don't know where the enemy is. And he says, yeah, I'm pretty sure there's probably not a bunch of snipers over there. Let's go see what happens. Like that would be terrifying. But on the other hand, you wouldn't want somebody leading you who's just completely oblivious and no matter what happens, no, I'm right and we're doing this and is like refuses to get feedback and constructive criticism. So how do you, what's your style? Have you grappled with these sorts? I think, you've read books and stuff. So what are your thoughts on that kind of dilemma?
Yeah. Humility, ego deflation, learning from mistakes, knowing that I'm not always going to be right. But I think humility, I think that's a really kind of a formal approach to humility, is like waking up every day. And so you could say, oh, I'm humble, but then, well, what is humility? Well, it's actively pursuing ego deflation every day. And that's a very important piece of it. Recognizing that I will always have defects of character and shortcomings, specifically those two things. And I wake up every day and I try to identify where my defects of character may lie and where my shortcomings may be. And I spend time with them and I come to terms with them. I try to. I don't do it, perfectly every day. But how do I exercise ego deflation? How do you tactfully deflate your ego in the attempt to becoming more humble so that you become a better leader? How do you breed trust? Well, there's an ingredients to trust. Trust is about being empathetic, and empathy is built on vulnerability. It's that trifecta of trust, empathy, and vulnerability, right? And the only way you can become trusted is to get there is to be humble, right? So people say, well, business happens at the speed of trust. So you're going to be trusted to make that decision where, well, let's go around the left bend, or like if I'm leading a team and around the left bend, there's snipers, and on the right bend, there's kind of a bunch of artisanal cheese and a charcuterie board with tasting note cards and a wine pairing. If I'm trusted, and I want to be trusted, like I want that, like I crave that. Like I feel God has, and I use God very, very intentionally. God has given me that responsibility. Like he's given me good genetics and a good body and a sharp mind. It's like, well, what do you want me to do with this? You've given me this. What am I supposed to do with it? Well, he has me leading people around the right bend, right? So I check into prayer. I check into meditation. I ask him for guidance. It's very obvious to me that, God exists, right? You and I've talked about scientific prayer. I believe in the science of God. So I can, through like obvious evidence, exercise humility, ego deflation, checking into my defects of character, understanding where my shortcomings are. So hopefully that I can, use like the big guy in the sky to go towards the cheese versus the snipers.
So, yeah, and you've mentioned that too, like there was a spiritual element to, the physical training too and everything. So, yeah. Can you maybe just elaborate on that? Like what your journey has been, like did your parents take you to church, or is this something you found on your own?
Yeah. My parents took me to church. I went to a Catholic school. I was never baptized. This is actually quite interesting, I think, at least. My parents didn't baptize me, but they sent me to a Catholic school because they wanted me to expose to religion. They wanted me exposed to like Bible study, but they didn't baptize me because they didn't want to make that decision for me. They wanted me to make the decision. They said, well, if you like this stuff, you'll go and get baptized on your own. So it was in grade 4 or 5, we went to, as a Catholic school, we went to the local church that was on our campus once a week. And I was never allowed, because I wasn't baptized, to participate in communion or confession. So I had to sit in the pew at this Catholic church while all of my friends went and participated, and I felt very ostracized.
And your sins were just piling up.
No, I was just like straight to hell. Like I felt like I was on it. By the time I graduated through grade 8, I was in grade 4 or 5 at the time. I thought I had a one-way ticket to hell. So I thought I better go get my ass baptized. And I was around the age where I thought, okay, I could do. So I went to Father Bennett. And truthfully, honestly, I think my motivation at the time was just to be part of my peer circle. So I wasn't ostracized, so I could go up and eat the bread. I wanted to try the frickin' bread, right? Like I didn't really think I wanted to even be baptized at the time. I just felt left out. And
you were like, can we get some Gouda with this?
Can we? Can I get some brie? So the Father Bennett wasn't having it though. He would not baptize me. He was not having it. So my parents went in and said, well, my son would like to be baptized. Why? He said, well, are you baptized? And then my mom wasn't baptized, but my grandmother, the one that's still alive today, that's 95 and thriving. Well, she's a Jehovah's Witness. Right? So my mom's not a Jehovah's Witness, but somehow it got back to the priest and my father was baptized Catholic. My father, in the priest size, married a Jehovah's Witness. And so the Catholic priest wasn't having it. He asked us all to leave his church.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I was a bit resentful. I never got baptized and I was a bit resentful. It wasn't until And so I was just like that pissed off kid thinking that, God is a joke and he wouldn't baptize me. And I realized, come checking into my shortcomings and my defects of character, that really my motivations were just to go and eat the bread and to be part of a social clique that I was kind of feeling left out on. And it wasn't until later in life that I kind of really thought just about the existence of life. Like really, I struggled just with, like a lot of people, the existence of life. And I just kind of realized that, well, if the Big Bang Theory is accurate, then, what is the thing that created the Big Bang Theory? And then, well, what is the thing that created that? And then what is the thing that created that? And then what is the thing that created that? And eventually I just kind of gave up and I said, well, just screw it. I'm just going to believe in God. Because it kind of eventually just kind of makes sense, right? It's just like there's science to it, to me, where it just scientifically, you kind of just have to, I at least just had to start believing in God because there's no other real explanation for the meaning of life. It just kind of made sense. And then, I went in rabbit holes of kind of studying people like Emmett Fox and Neville Goddard, these guys that talk about scientific prayer, and you can intentionally, ask God for things because, we are as humans in his likeness, and we have a responsibility again to do these kind of things.
Okay, very interesting. When you pitched to me joining Infineo, you said, Bob, we're taking whole life insurance, the infinite banking approach of using whole life insurance policies for cash management purposes, with infinite banking being the term Nelson Nash developed, and marrying it with blockchain technology. So I know I've heard you tell the story. You were looking for what's the killer blockchain app, and then you realized it was life insurance. So you want to tell us a little bit about that discovery?
Yeah, it was selling my cheese business, having an exit, having capital cash in a bank. My financial advisor saying, put it in life insurance. I went, what? I laughed so hard. He goes, Cole, you're a smart guy. Go do the work. I did the work, and I realized, wow, okay, you're right. I do need to put it there. And then I felt that was part of the discovery that I had also about value and about promoting the most valuable thing. I realized that infinite banking, as Nelson Nash put it, was the most valuable financial strategy in the world. I was convinced of it. And I still am today. I still think there's no smarter thing you can do financially. I'll just put it, I always want to leave the word financially out. I just kind of want to say there's no smarter thing you can do, period. But I'm going to just say financially, just to kind of be a little more appropriate with it, than putting your money in properly designed life insurance that's designed for this type of strategy. And I'm like, why are more people not doing it? What's the government going to do when they catch on to this loop? There's no loophole. And, what is my responsibility to sharing this message? So I just gone on a mission. And then I realized, how do you scale this globally? That was the big question. I said, well, what technologies are out there? And I discovered blockchain technology. There's a whole story as how I got into blockchain and got into AI, but mostly blockchain. This was many, many years ago, trying to find use cases for it. And what I was doing with my life insurance, my capital and my life insurance policies, I was going and I was taking policy loans. And I was leveraging life insurance policies to go and invest into other assets. Then I was also into DeFi and crypto at the time, and I was staking Bitcoin and stable coins and tokens and coins. And I was kind of thinking to myself, the mechanism of what I'm doing is staking is almost the exact mechanism of how I'm leveraging life insurance. And then I started to kind of piece blockchain and life insurance together. And there was this real natural, non-fungible kind of hand-in-glove relationship between the two. And I realized that they mutually need each other. And I don't know if life insurance is the best use case for blockchain, or is blockchain the best use case for life insurance? I would argue that life insurance is a better use case for blockchain than Bitcoin is. Right? And I will die on that idea. And I will go forward and prove it out, that it is. And that's what we're doing today. But my favorite story of this entire journey is how I tried to recruit you. That was my favorite journey of all this whole story, really. Was because I realized that when I was standing this up and I was serious and I had a responsibility, I needed to go out and get the best. I needed to get the guy, right? I needed to go and get Dr. Murphy. I needed somehow to get Dr. Murphy who was my mentor, who, I read all of your books. You guided me through this infinite banking. When I was doing the work, on, is this infinite banking thing a real thing? I was reading all of your books, reading all of your white papers. I mean, you were the kind of the central. So then I thought, now I have a responsibility to tell this story and distribute bridging life insurance as we know it to blockchain. I can't move forward, without you. And it was, I think, me plagiarizing one of your books and sending it to you in the version of my attempt at a white paper that probably made you laugh and feel pity on me and say, okay, I'll come and help you out.
I realize you're being self-deprecating now. It was more like, oh, I was intrigued. And then some point we'll have to talk more about it, maybe not with cameras rolling. There were a lot of things going on in my life that had to all just happen coincidentally for this all to happen. And so again, it leads you to think, it seems like maybe there's something going on here besides just random chaos, and unplanned events. And so a lot of this stuff, all even half joking aside, is coming together. We don't have time right now. I know you got to leave here in a second, but like with the artificial intelligence and everything, stuff is happening as where we recently hired Christian Hubbs of, folks we was on an earlier episode of this podcast, PhD in machine learning from Carnegie Mellon, just top level guy in the AI field. We have him at, and some of the things that these large language models are doing, it's like, they shouldn't be performing this well. And to me, it's like, oh, there's information embedded even like in the syntax of the spoken language more than humans realized. And so again, just you're seeing design built in, like whether you take a cell and zoom way in on it, if you take fractals like the Mandelbrot set, it's just, hey, it's just some numbers. But if you zoom in on it, it looks like there's a whole universe that, all this stuff you see evidence, I would say, of a intelligent creator all over the place. And so it's interesting. And all coming full circle too, you were talking about, the health benefits and whatever that recently, these exercises we were doing various insurance policies, just seeing the numbers of how much, if you're a smoker, how much more you have to pay for death benefit coverage. And you know what I mean? And so it's like, we're quantifying, just showing people like, yeah, this is, if you could, change your lifestyle, and look, it's money in your pocket. It's really, so like as you say often, like the human life is the most valuable asset. Like there's these machines that just throw off productive capacity, and a life insurance policy is what we've come up with at the market kind of quantifies that and values the human life, and to give it some sort of exchange value and make it the present discounted value. So it's a lot of different strands all coming together here, what we're doing at Infineo every day. So I'll give you want to take a minute and give some closing remarks to the viewers?
Yeah, sure. And I think we would, if I could, I'll just build off of what you just said, which is the thing that I love to say the most, which is just the value of a human life. And it's even, just thinking about like talking to you today and kind of like you asking me to go back to my kind of origin story about health and about well-being, and about, getting to, where Infineo is today. Really, essentially what we've done is we've given every human being that has a human body and somewhat of a coherent mind the ability to really leverage, liquidate, and valuate that asset of a human life. And it's God-given. It's your right to leverage it in a sustainable way to become as wealthy as you can be and to enjoy the fruits of that wealth. And it's just right there. And it sounds really odd, but it's very, very true. The measurement of how to leverage, liquidate, or evaluate your life is through life insurance. And we talk a lot about what does that look like generationally. It's the solution to a lot of problems. You wrote a white paper recently that I asked you to write. I begged and pleaded for years, that you wrote a white paper, on the idea of, so what would it look like if every child in America was life insured, and how many generations would it take for consumer debt or the world to kind of change economically, right? Well, it's the solution for universal basic income. It's the argument against it's universal basic income on steroids without government intervention. It's like, I'm just coming up with this right now, by the way, but it's like the Austrian kind of libertarian universal basic income. It's the antidote. It's the anti-UBI, right? It's how we take control back almost, is by insuring our kids and doing it generationally. And so we have our own wealth by leveraging, liquidating, and valuating the most important thing in the world, which is a human being.
Yeah, building up like that heritage, passed down through your family so that, you don't have to turn to the government and the state to take care of you. Okay, well, that's a great spot to wrap up. Folks, my guest this week has been Cole Snell, the founder and current CEO of Infineo. And Cole, thanks so much for your time and your insights.
Love you, Dr. Murphy. Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
This concludes another episode of InFi, The Future of Finance, with Dr. Robert Murphy. The information provided is for educational purposes and does not constitute financial advice. Consult with qualified professionals before making any financial or investment decisions. For more information on the host and for previous episodes, visit infi, thefutureoffinance.io. Thanks for listening.